Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to our series, Inspiring Ideas from Experts in the Field. This webinar series is a new workshop format for NOFAMAS this year, and our hope is we can make quality farm management and farming education easily accessible to everyone. My name is Brittany Overshiner, and I'm the Beginning Farmer Program Coordinator for NOFAMAS. My email is Brittany, B-R-I-T-T-A-N-Y, @nofamas.org. Feel free to contact me with feedback about this webinar or with any beginning farmer questions. Before I start tonight, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Frontier Natural Products, Lancaster Agriculture, and UMass Risk Management Crop Insurance Education Program for supporting the production of this series. I'd also like to thank New Entry Sustainable Farming Project and Tufts Friedman School of Nutritional Science and Policy for providing access to the WebEx software we are using to host the workshop. Also, many thanks to the NOFAMAS staff and board members who have helped make this workshop possible. If you are not a member of NOFAMAS, please consider joining to support our education and policy work. Visit our website, nofamas.org, to learn more. Tonight's presenter is Leah Penniman of Soulfire Farm in Petersburg, New York. Leah got her farming start as a teen with a food project in Boston, and then she worked with a farm school caring for goats and teaching city kids where carrots come from. Leah also worked for and co-managed Many Hands Organic Farm in Barre, Mass. For several years, co-founded Youth Grow in Worcester, Mass. And worked with farmers in Ghana, West Africa, and Kome, Haiti. Her areas of leadership at Soulfire include farmer training, youth educational programming, international solidarity with Haitian farmers, food justice organizing, and anything that involves heavy lifting, sweat, and soil. The format will be a presentation from Leah with a few breaks for questions and then questions at the end. Just so you all know how to type in a question, if you go to the top corner of your screen, top right corner, you'll see a little square icon that says chat. You can go in there. Make sure you select send to everyone for the chat, and unless you want to send a question to me privately. And you can type in, like I just typed hello, and you should see the chat button turn to orange, and that'll indicate that there's a question or something written there. So you can type those in, and Leah will be able to check those at the end. If you have any technical questions, please send me private messages throughout. Otherwise, I'm going to pass the controls over to Leah, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you guys very much for joining us tonight. Leah, here are the controls. And you should be good to go.
Great. Thank you so much. One second. All right. So first of all, thanks so much for having me. I just got the Natural Farmer in the mail today with information about carbon farming, and it reminded us how much we appreciate NOFAMAS because it's one of the few farming and food justice organizations that still is really hands on the ground. So thank you. I'm really honored to present, and I've had a relationship with NOFA since I was a teenager. So without further ado, I'm excited to share with you all tonight some of the learning that I've been really honored to attain through my work with farmers in Ghana, Haiti, and Mexico over the past several years. I was both struck and terrified and inspired at the same time by this World Resources Institute report that came out a couple years ago that was talking about how in the year 2050, we're going to have 9.6 billion people, and that even if we redistributed all the food on the planet fairly, we would need to produce 69% more calories just to avoid starvation. And we have to do that in a way that doesn't continue to degrade Earth's ecosystems and doesn't continue to exacerbate climate change. And so I kind of dove into this WRI report and started recognizing really fast that the solutions that they were recommending and quantifying for sustainable ag were solutions that had already been developed and refined by indigenous farmers around the world who I had been working with firsthand. So I'll use sort of the, that academic think tank lens as well as some stories of personal experience throughout, and I look forward to seeing your questions at the end. But before we jump too far, I always feel that it's important to honor ancestors and honor those who came before us and made sacrifices for us to be where we are. And today, in particular, I've been thinking a lot about my maternal ancestors who are from the Dahomey region of West Africa, and many of whom were captured and sold as slaves in the transatlantic slave trade in the 16 and 1700s. And the story that's come down to me about these powerful and courageous women is that in the face of brutality and uncertainty and oppression, the decision that they made was to take the okra and rice seeds and other seeds that they had been preserving over generations and to braid them in their hair and to braid them in their children's hair, believing against odds in a future on soil and a future of harvest. So I call that to mind because our ancestors, my ancestors, certainly knew the value of the seed and the value of their agricultural wisdom, but they also knew how to call up resilience in the face of difficulty. And right now, I feel that we're in a particularly dark and challenging time as folks who love justice and sustainability. And I know that if my ancestors didn't give up in the face of what they had to deal with, then certainly we can't give up either. So I invite you to call in your ancestors and thank your ancestors for giving you the guidance and example that they have. So just real quick, where I'm coming from, and thank you so much for the introduction. I've been a farmer for 20 years, currently at Soul Fire Farm in Grafton, New York, which I founded together with my husband Jonah and our beautiful children, Nashima and Emmett. We are a small farm. We do about 5 acres intensively managed, like half in veggies and fruits and half in pastured poultry. And that is all distributed through a farm share program, a CSA program with 80 to 100 families. And we do doorstep delivery in neighborhoods affected by food apartheid, meaning neighborhoods where folks are low income and wouldn't otherwise have access to good food because of discrimination and problematic policies that really limit access to life-giving food. So that's all sliding scale and accessible to people regardless of income. We also are an educational and activist farm and work with this year well over 2,000 people for farmer training that focuses on the needs of Black and Latinx farmers, youth food justice, and a lot of regional and national organizing to end racism in the food system. There's just a few of us. There's my husband and I full-time, and then 3 seasonal farmers and educators who join us. So that's an overview, and if folks have more questions about Soul Fire, I'm happy to talk about that at the end. So just to contextualize these real amazing success stories of what folks are doing in Mexico, Ghana, and Haiti, I mentioned briefly the World Resources Institute report about the growing population and our need to increase productivity of agriculture to feed everyone. And I'm sure, folks on this call are aware that agriculture is currently the most impactful human activity on the planet. And so agriculture is the #1 driver of climate change, of land use conversions, and of water withdrawals, not to mention other serious issues like the disappearance of pollinators or, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and health problems from pesticide exposure. So agriculture has a huge impact that's currently pretty negative because the landscape is dominated by corporate ag that is conventional, but that also means there's a huge potential for us to make a change as farmers. And it's not just the environmental impacts of farming that I'm really concerned about. I think that everyone eats. We all require land to survive, and right now the power and privilege in our food system is really skewed towards European heritage folks, toward descendants of colonizers. So the farm ownership in this country is dominated by white folks and has been getting increasingly so since the early 1900s. And so that's of grave concern because there's a whole network of policies that make it really difficult for people to retain land, to get land, to receive assistance for maintaining their farms. And part of the consequence of that lack of access to land and power in the community is huge health consequence, huge health issues for particular communities of color in terms of obesity and diabetes and cancer and heart disease and depression and learning disabilities. And of course, as farmers, I believe that it's important for us to not only focus on the product that we create, but the equity that we create. So who is having access to that food? Who is making the decisions about how land is used? How are we treating Mother Earth that sustains us? And so I really believe that, to be free, we are responsible for feeding not just ourselves, but our community, and also engaging our community in decision making. And have had the great privilege to see that, we as farmers here in the States aren't alone in that as smallholders, that there's a whole international movement of farmers like us called Via Campesina that's working at that intersection of environmental justice and social justice. So to get into the meat of it, the 3 places in the world besides Grafton, New York, that I have a deep and meaningful connection are the state of Oaxaca in Mexico, where in 2015 our family went on a research Fulbright fellowship to study indigenous agriculture and to write youth curriculum based on those best practices. And then in Comier, Léogâne, Haiti, where our family, together with other Haitian Americans, have been running these solidarity delegations called Haiti Resurrect since the 2010 earthquake. So I've been to Haiti 7 or 8 times since then, working with farmers on reforestation projects and small-scale like value-added technologies for their farms. And then in Odumasi Krobo, Ghana, where I lived for 6 months in 2002 and have since returned a couple of times, and was working with farmers who were returning to an organic way of life after having been heavily influenced by Monsanto to adopt a chemical-based agriculture and seeing its failures. So I'll be sharing just a few examples of the wisdom from the campesinos in Mexico and the paisaño, or the peasant movements in Haiti and Ghana. All right. So the first is this whole amazing concept of intercropping. So these examples are from Mexico, of the cafetal and the milpa, which are really examples of farming like the forest. And I'm sure many of you have read like Eric Tonsmeyer's book and heard about permaculture. And it's important to me that we don't just appropriate and aggregate these indigenous technologies and rebrand them as permaculture or as food forests, because they are indigenous technologies. Each one is distinct and each one has a specific origin. And the first step in cultural reverence is really to name and understand those true origins. So I won't be talking about permaculture or food forests. I'll really be talking about the specific technologies that were shared directly with me from the indigenous community. So with cafetal, it's a shady multi-story system that has at least 3 layers. And the whole goal of the cafetal system is to pull down moisture from the sky and channel it into the soil. So there'll be the purple potted guaji trees, which fix nitrogen, and fruit trees that have the upper layer, and then coffee trees at intermediate, and smaller food plants and vines like chiles and chayotes near the ground. And what happens then is that the trees are protecting the plants lower to the ground from high winds and cold temperatures, and also the fallen leaves are miners of soil minerals and provide that compost layer and nutrient for the plants underneath. So they're inhibiting weeds, adding fertility, and retaining humidity. And this system of shade-grown coffee has been shown to almost equal native forests in terms of biodiversity, and it maintains habitat for migratory birds. So, back home in Grafton, New York, of course, we can't grow coffee or guaji trees because it's too cold, but we have started to model our orchards after this multi-layered system with, a layer of herbs growing at the bottom, and then bushes and nut trees in the middle story, like hazelnuts, and then our fruit trees in the upper story. The milpa sometimes people may have heard of like the three sisters concept is an annual intercrop. And in Mexico, it was really more like 12 sisters that we saw, not really three sisters. But the idea, it's a Mesoamerican technology that's at least 3,000 years old, and it integrates maize, beans, and squash, plus a lot of other food crops. And the way those crops interact is that the beans, of course, are legumes, so they fix atmospheric nitrogen, but they also have been shown to reduce damage caused by the corn earworm pest. And then the squash inhibits weed growth and retains moisture. And there's a natural chemical, cucurbitacins, that are washed off the leaf surface that act as a pesticide and protect the other plants. So this is a system that we tried to adopt pretty directly, and we're really impressed that even though it's difficult for our sensibilities that want, one crop in one space to actually plant the three together, we were able to increase our, overall harvest from that area of land by 40 to 50% as compared to, just planting each crop separately. We've since experimented with a couple other intercrops, and we don't have all the data crunch, but it seems like intercropping tomatoes with bell beans works well. We tried that for the first time this year after seeing in the meal butts tomatoes intercropped with garbanzo in Mexico. And the idea, of course, is that you have nitrogen fixation, you have the ground cover and moisture retention. We were a little worried about fungal disease in our tomato, but it seemed to work pretty well. So we'll just have to calculate our yield to be sure. So I have to say one more thing about milpa is that Professor Wilkes at UMass calls milpa one of the most successful human inventions ever created. So it's something for us to consider. Another technology that we witnessed relates to protein sources. So I'm sure folks are aware that getting our protein from animal products increasingly in the wealthy countries in the world is problematic for many reasons, for climate change certainly, but also just for efficiency of the use of resources. So even though poultry is the most efficient converter of its food to meat itself, and we do raise some poultry on our farm, it's still only 11% efficient, whereas like beef cows are 1% efficient and are major contributors to greenhouse gases. So in the rural areas in Oaxaca, of course, people are eating a lot less meat than we're eating here in the United States. And the protein assemblage that they worked out includes insects, which is fascinating. Insects like the chicatana ants or chapulines, and it takes some getting used to, but there are some ways that they kind of hide the insects in food so they don't, at least they didn't gross me out. They would grind up the crickets or the chapulines into a flour and integrate that into tortilla, so you have a high protein bread. They also use a lot of plant proteins like amaranth, which is a native Mesoamerican grain that's been cultivated for at least 6,000 years in Mexico. And it was nearly eradicated by the Spaniards because they feared its role in traditional religion. And so they would punish the growing of amaranth by cutting off people's hands. So it's only recently making a comeback. And, I had certainly heard of eating amaranth, thought it was kind of gross and weird and more of a weed, a problematic weed in the garden. But in fact, it is the highest protein of any grain with a 13 to 15% protein. And it has also a lot of calcium, iron, potassium, phosphorus, zinc, folate, and vitamins. So if you combine amaranth with another grain like maize, you have all of your 12 essential amino acids. So another thing they taught me about protein is, of course, that grains and tubers have proteins in them too, but many of those amino acids aren't available to us because of digestion. So the way they process food is nixtamalization, or the way they process maize, and that frees up the protein in the niacin for human digestion. And what nixtamalization means is simply cooking the grain in limestone, which degrades some of its like outer cellulose cover and makes those nutrients more bioavailable, and also makes it so you can turn it into a tortilla dough. In Haiti, too, the solutions that farmers were coming up with so that they didn't have to rely on meat were, again, plant-based. So Moringa
Hey,
is an
Leah, one
incredible...
second, your sound cut out.
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Just now.
So I was just saying that, you know, similar to in Mexico, where the campesinos were figuring out ways to not rely on animal protein, in Haiti, folks are increasingly relying on the moringa tree, which has leaves that are incredibly high in protein and vitamins. It's considered a superfood. It's also fast growing and helps prevent erosion on the steep, degraded hillsides of Haiti. And its seeds, moringa seeds, can be used to filter viruses and bacteria out of contaminated water. So, of course, again, I can't grow moringa. I did try. It grows in my house. But I can grow amaranth, and I can think about preparing my farm share boxes so that they have complete proteins without relying on animal protein. So thinking about combinations of different crops that complement each other in terms of amino acids, and that's something we've been paying more attention to. It's not that, you know, we shouldn't be eating any meat or animal products, but in order to have a sustainable planet and feed everyone, our reliance on plant-based proteins is going to have to increase. All right. So something else that was really inspiring in terms of indigenous technologies in both Mexico and Haiti was the methods for reclaiming marginal lands. This particular picture is an after photo of an area in the Mixteca in Oaxaca that's very arid and was termed an ecological disaster zone by the World Bank because of its soil erosion and depletion. There was about 1 million acres of cropland that was damaged, and the productivity of the soil went down to the lowest of all of different regions in Mexico. So what a lot of farmers blamed that on was the Green Revolution technologies and the US-led efforts to push like mechanization and hybrid seeds and chemical fertilizers, and in that process just degrading these really fragile soils. And the thing is that, you know, there isn't that much prime farmland left that doesn't already have farms on it or that hasn't been converted to suburbs. So as a planet, we need to figure out how to reclaim and restore these marginal lands if we're going to feed the population. And that was something that Joan and I was really near to our heart because we had spent a number of years as urban farmers in our career, and we're working with leaded soils. And so we had to develop techniques of building up instead of digging down and restoring the soil through phytoremediation in order to grow food in these urban areas. And so when we purchased land and moved out to a rural farm, we wanted to hold on to and amplify these same techniques of improving the soil and not relying on mining it for what's already there, but adding to it. So when we started our farm, for the first couple of years, we were entirely no-till, and we built up using recycled paper and compost, leaf and straw mulch, and did, you know, absolutely no digging, no flipping, just aeration. Since then, we've integrated a small amount of till, but we've still seen with a very low till system a huge increase in our soil organic matter, an increase in our topsoil depth, fungal life, and other biodiversity in the soil. So it was exciting to see what these indigenous farmers were doing around reclaiming lands. And both in Mexico and in Haiti, they started with erosion control. So this plant here is called vetiver. It's a fast-growing grass that has a very dense root system, a deep root system. And so anywhere where soil was degraded, we'd start by building these erosion control barriers of vetiver, and that would halt further soil loss and provide enough soil retention and moisture retention for us to plant trees. So we used trenches, stone walls, and terraces with vetiver just to stop the erosion and slow the water runoff so the aquifers could recharge. And then we'd stabilize these barriers with more tenacious and long-lasting vegetation so that it could withstand flooding and mudslides. So in in Mexico, we used alders and pines because they were native and fast growing. And then once the trees were established, annual plants could be planted behind the trees. And so you'd have, every terrace would have a boundary of vetiver and trees, and then a big open area that could be used for annual crops like chayote, squash, sunflowers, tomatillos, and so on. And all of the crops would have an understory of, all of these annual crops would have an understory of cover crops. And the cover crop that they liked in Oaxaca was called frijoles café. It's a Mucuna variety, and the reason it works so well is because, of course, it's nitrogen fixing, but it also thrives in very dry soils. And we did actually find that frijoles café grows in New York, so we're excited to do some trials and experiment with that. So let's see what else. So that's it for restoring degraded soils. And I think one thing to mention about Haiti is one of the reasons the soils were so degraded in the first place, if we want to get to root cause, is that after Haiti successfully won its independence from Napoleon's army and from the French and earned our freedom in 1804, the European powers were so anxious and nervous about this example of rebellion that they wanted to punish Haiti indefinitely. So the first sort of act of war against Haiti was for France to charge Haiti 80 million francs in, quote, reparations for their freedom, because they considered the slaves' freedom to be stolen property. And the way that Haiti decided to pay this off, rather than face, this ongoing war and embargo, was to cut down all of the hardwood trees and sell them to be free of debt. And of course, without the trees and with these steep mountainsides and fragile soils, the topsoil just washed into the ocean. And that repair process is still ongoing to this day. Haiti's never fully been able to recover. So there are a lot of things that we can do in the moment, and we should never give up hope, but it's good to contextualize some of these challenges that we face as sustainable farmers, in their political and social history. So something that farmers in Mexico, Ghana, and Haiti all had in common, and I am sure many of us on this webinar also have in common, is just this deep reverence for the earth and for the land, and seeing that there's a connection beyond the material and beyond what the land can produce that's profoundly heart-based and spiritual. So Charo Cruz, who's one Zapotec farmer that we worked with in Yagavila, he said, "The ground beneath our feet is our mother nature, who has carried us and sustains us. As we work her, we do not profane her. Rather, we carry out our task as farmers in the context of the sacred. It is corn through which Mother Nature nourishes us. It is the flesh of our flesh, because we are people of corn. So we have to collect it in a manner that shows the respect we owe both our soil and our brother corn." And similarly, in both Ghana and Haiti, where people practice the traditional African religions, the farm itself is considered an aspect of the divine. And so we sing prayers and make offerings and ask for blessings and offer thanks to the land. In this particular ceremony here, the ceremony of Manje Yam, where reverence and respects are given to the first harvest of the staple crop of the yam. And I think that's important to remember, that the earth herself is a spirit, and we take care of her through, cover cropping and composting and all of these things, but that she also needs, our love and prayer and reverence and song and intimate relationship. So moving a little bit more into our African traditions, something that I've come to understand is really important in this climate uncertain world is to reconsider the basis of our diet as a grain-based diet. And in Ghana and other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, folks have figured out that a tuber-based diet is much more efficient, so relying on yam and cassava, sweet potato, malanga. And the reason is that these crops, and plantain too, which is not a tuber, but we'll group it for the sake of brevity, they're very low labor and high yields. With plantain, you're talking about 200,000 pounds per acre as opposed to 3,000 pounds per acre for wheat. And it's a, perennial, so it's producing for 30 or so years. And tuber crops and plantain crops are much more resistant to to hurricanes and to droughts and have lower labor input. So we think about a world where we're not really sure what kind of weather we're going to get and the sensitivity of grains. It behooves us to consider some of these diets of our ancestors and whether they might be more appropriate for climate resiliency. Also, many of the technologies that we take for granted as organic farmers to ensure soil health have roots in Ghana and other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. For example, the use of crop residue, or otherwise known as mulch, evidence has thousands and thousands of year old evidence has been found in West Africa of that practice, using legumes for intercropping, alternating between your cultivars and your herded animals, using flooding for rice cultivation, the hoe itself, the work party or the kombit, this collective labor. And I mention this because I think that it uplifts all of our integrity and also our sense of connection to one another when we know the true origins of some of these technologies. Like, for example, you know, growing up going to NOFA conferences, I always thought that organic farming was like invented by the Nearings or something, you know, and it wasn't until relatively recently that I came to understand that African heritage people have had great contributions to the fields of sustainable farming. For example, Dr. Carver out of Tuskegee in Alabama was the first to really codify and publicize regenerative farming. He took these indigenous practices of crop rotation, of focusing on soil biodiversity, wrote manuals, went and gave field talks, and named it regenerative farming, which is really the first mention in the United States of what we now call organic farming. And along the same vein, his protege at Tuskegee, Booker T. Watley, was the first one to define the CSA. So he called it the Clientele Membership Club, and really believed that when farmers had close, ongoing, enduring relationships with their customers and with their members, then they would have this guaranteed market, and they could offer their members wholesale prices and high quality products. But they, as farmers, would be able to really plan production and anticipate demand. And so similarly, I didn't know until somewhat recently that this was another Black farming technology that is so important to ensure the sustainability of farming, because it is almost a zero waste technology. And right now, almost half of the calories produced on Earth are wasted at some point along the cycle. So if we as farmers can figure out how to reduce waste, then we're doing a small part towards being able to feed the world without wrecking the planet. And then we talk about two ownership models and business models beyond CSA. The land trust was brought to us by the Sherrod family. They started the first community land trust in the United States in the 60s and had a over 5,000 acre farm that was shared by 500 Black families in the South. And they faced many obstacles and discrimination for doing what they did. Eventually, their farm was seized. They experienced violence and their farm was seized, and only recently have they been able to get their farm back. And cooperatives, another model of sustainability from the economics side. And cooperatives have roots in many, many indigenous traditions, so we certainly can't claim it just for African heritage folks or any one group. But Black people in this country have been very invested in the cooperative movement, from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives up to the Freedom Farm Cooperative and many others. There's a book that recently came out called Collective Thought on this. But Fannie Lou Hamer is known for her political work with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, but not a lot of folks know that she also ran this incredible shared farm and was able to provide equipment and funds for funeral services and seasonal bulk services and loans and all of that to the members of her farm. And then, you know, we're up against a lot right now with this administration and with the current international climate being hostile to what's human and good and true and right. And again, I turn a lot to indigenous farmers who are on the front lines and experiencing these challenges firsthand for leadership, and was just so moved and really grateful to learn that the peasant movement in Haiti was able to stand up to Monsanto, this huge, seed and agribusiness giant, right after the earthquake when Monsanto wanted to dump barges of rice and barges of seed onto the Haitian market at the time of harvest. So it would have undermined the ability of farmers to bring their crops to sale and succeed that year. And even in their desperation, when it would have been easy to kind of accept what looks like benign charity, but actually was an attempt to undermine people's sovereignty, they didn't do that. They burned the seed. They organized and burned Monsanto seed and were awarded the Global Food Sovereignty Prize in 2013 for this act of defiance. And this very public act is, just what's on the surface. I mean, they have been working really hard to maintain their own seed heritage through seed exchanges and seed banks and through supporting one another with technical assistance to retain their traditional way of life as farmers. And it continues. I think that I put up this slide just to continue to dismantle the myth that sustainable farming is only the purview of folks with light skin and European heritage. These are some of the incredible leaders today in this country who are showing us both production models, but also economic models for making sure that we can feed our community. Karen Washington at Rise and Root Farm, Malika Keeney at Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, Tasha Bowens at Color of Food, Dennis Derrick with Corbin Hill Food Project, which is an amazing food hub outside of New York City. Bryant Terry, who's remaking our cuisine so that soul food can be fresh and local. Will Allen, demonstrating that urban farming can be highly productive and profitable. And Tanya Fields really advocating for consumer rights and urban gardener rights. It's just a few of the examples of people who are really inspirational and really paving the way for the work. And these are some of the organizations, both nationally and regionally and around the world. I mentioned Via Campesina, which is the international peasant movement focused on food sovereignty, which is the right of all of us to not only have enough good food to eat and access to land, but also to be agents and decision makers in the food system. U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance is something folks can get involved with. For folks who are African heritage, there's the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, there's the Black Farmers Conference, and so on. So I'm going to pause there. I did put up our website and my email, and you can find bibliography and more information about all of this stuff on our website, but I'm excited to see your questions and engage in a little bit of conversation and even hear from you all if you have examples of ways that you are amplifying indigenous technologies on your farm.
And we actually have a lot of call-in users tonight, so if you're calling in, you can text a question to my cell phone, and then I can type it in or just say it to Leah. My phone number is 857-383-7020. That's 857-383-7020. And again, for those of you who've signed on late, you can go to the chat function, which is the little icon in the top right corner of your screen. Open it up. Make sure you send the question or comment to everyone. And Leah, I just want to say that was really interesting. I learned a lot from that presentation. If I can lead off with a question while people are working on the technology, I'm curious to know, I am a farmer, but not a landowner, but a farmer. What are some things that I can do either to modify my business plan or modify my relationship with my community that can start to either bring more of this to light or create a more just food system? Are there things that I'm missing besides when I'm just growing food and selling it to whoever shows up to buy it?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. There's a little bit of an echo. I don't know if you want to mute while I talk and then. So I think that's a great question. And we as farmers certainly have a responsibility not to be complicit in terms of injustice in the food system, but I also want to acknowledge that many of us as farmers don't even make a living wage ourselves and often put in much longer hours than are reasonable. And so I don't want farmers to feel like we have to fix it all by ourselves. A lot of it is at the policy level. That said, there are still a few things that I think all of us can do. One is that we're all communicators and storytellers in some way because we market and talk to our community members. So I think that as much as we can tell the truth about the origins of our farming practices and really uplift the cultures and traditions that they come from in our stories, that's important. I think also in terms of food access, if we're doing, for example, a farmer down the road asked us about this, and I was just saying, even if food justice is not your explicit mission, it's not that much extra work to put out in your CSA sign up that folks can pay a little extra to subsidize someone else's share, and then letting people know that they can have a lower cost share, or offering a sliding scale for certain products or certain boxes, because that might increase access for even a few families. And I think too, in the winter when things maybe slow down by 10%, it's good for us to organize ourselves. NOFA is a great platform for organizing, and there's policy work that NOFA is doing around the fight for 15 and fair minimum wage and fair working conditions for farm workers. There's a integrity of CSA kind of document going around in the NOFA network, and then there's also work to make the NOFA conference a more diverse and anti-racist platform for conversation. And so I think if we can, each of us just give a handful of hours to these organizing efforts, then we've done a bit. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
I think people are being a little bit shy tonight.
I know. I'm curious too. I mean, I'm very much a beginner in all of this. I've been grateful to have the chance to travel a bit and learn, but my knowledge is still haphazard. And I imagine there's some people on the call who've also had interactions with farmers outside of our climate zone and outside of American culture, and just be curious what people are learning. One thing that was so amazing to me when I was in Mexico, I was talking to farmers about erosion control, and they had never thought of or heard of the whole idea of like using vetiver first, and then even though they had that wild plant there, and then planting the trees. And then in Haiti, folks had never heard of nixtamalization, even though they grow a lot of maize, and so they were not getting the full nutrition. And so just sharing those two ideas, people immediately adopted them because they're so easy and they make a lot of sense. And it got me thinking about how much wisdom there is in campesinos and peasant farmers. And because we're very rooted in the land and often not people with wealth, it's not like we just get around and tell other folks what we're doing in different countries. And I was envisioning the power of what that information exchange would look like. So I don't think we should underestimate, sharing even the smallest bit of wisdom, the smallest idea that we've learned with one another, because it can amplify all of our work.
Leah, are there any techniques besides you mentioned the intercropping and some of the maybe more permaculture-like techniques that you used on your farm? Are there any other techniques that you have brought home with you that you find are either more profitable or more enjoyable ways to manage other elaborations on those things?
I like more enjoyable. I hadn't thought about it through that lens. Well, I guess just more, what I didn't mention were the techniques we were already using, but then we felt affirmed about their use when we saw we weren't alone. So we farm on a slope, like many farmers all around the world who don't have access to river bottom soil, and so we use semi-permanent raised beds on contour, and we have very heavy clay soils. So after a rain, you'll see those pathways full of water, and that water kind of slowly percolating because of the way we've shaped the landscape. And that's been so important. Like a lot of farmers around us lost half their topsoil with the hurricane a few years ago, and we didn't, just because we really slow water down across our field. And that's something that folks did in all three locations, some type of mounding and trenching of water. I think also using the pathways as like sort of compost in place, where we throw plant debris into the pathways or extra mulch and then muck out the pathways and put that back onto the beds. That in Mexico, there's a system called Chinampas outside of Mexico City, a really old, very, very productive form of farming that's essentially taking a shallow lake and mucking it out and making these islands or like raised beds really in the middle of these low lakes. And they're highly fertile, and you can get 3 or 4 croppings out of them. And we've similarly found, with that constant addition of organic matter from our pathways onto our beds, that we can get away with, for us, 2 or 3 successions in a year, obviously with no chemical fertilizers. So those are some techniques that I guess you would say are profitable. Enjoyable. Oh, you know what's enjoyable that farmers do in both locations is just this concept of like a kitchen garden, of having your herbs and your berries and your cherry tomatoes like right outside of the area where you cook and eat. Most farmers would have their fields a long walk away where they grew their staple crops, but then right outside of their homes would be all of these easy to pick things. And we similarly do that. We have our medicinal herbs and our culinary herbs and berries and things really close. And so that just makes life great, because you can grab something to eat or something to make you feel better without a whole bunch of effort. All right, so someone said, could I write something? I actually do have an article, and if you're good with Google, if you just search, what did I call it? It's if you search Yes Magazine, Penniman, and Mexico, you'll get it. So it talks about 4 of the technologies. Growing plant-based proteins in the north, the most success that I've had is really with legumes and amaranth. So we grow a whole bunch of dry beans, and then amaranth, and tubers also have a lot of protein, like your sweet potatoes and your potatoes, but you need to mix them with an amaranth or a legume to have all 12 essential amino acids. So that's what we've experimented with. Just this past year, we tried fava beans, the bell bean variety, and we're really, really pleased with the outcome. They're such a tenacious plant, and they like to germinate in cold soil. So we found, it's really cold right now here, like, I don't know, 20-degree nights, 15-degree nights, and we have germinating bell beans that reseeded themselves from our understory crops. So we're excited about that, because a lot of summer beans are kind of finicky. And then this question is, someone works at a small urban gardening organization and wants to recruit a more diverse group of gardeners. Well, I think I would have to know more, but I always encourage folks to step outside of the recruitment mentality and really think about how we can serve the stated existing needs of community. So rather than, starting a project and thinking that it's the thing that everyone needs and trying to get people to come, starting by paying attention to what's already going on, what people are asking for, and seeing how we can serve. So to give a concrete example of that, there was no community gardens in North Troy, but there was a Little League. And the Little League was organized by parents who were concerned that their children were unsafe in the streets and had, nothing to do after school. And the kids played Little League, the parents organized it, it was great. They came out to the farm just to have a meeting because they needed to get out of the city. And by being on the farm, they started thinking, oh, wouldn't it be neat if we had healthier snacks in our snack shack for the kids, because they're just having like hot dogs and soda, and could our farm kind of ally and support with that, which we did. And then the kids got excited about having this diversity of snacks, and the idea came out that they wanted to start growing the food for the snack shack, and they started a garden. But it really came from like what the community wanted and was an organic process. And I think a lot of times organizations struggle because the idea is like outreach and recruitment, rather than really being with and organizing with. But again, I don't know much about your situation, so that's more of general advice.
Leah, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us tonight.
Of course.
Your insights are really valuable,